My name is Sebastian Denise. I'm a Senior Programs Officer at the Canada Foundation for Innovation. Before we begin this webinar, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the objective of the Northern Fund is to enable research that directly engages with and serves the needs of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities in the North. The CFI's office is located on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. We are grateful to all the generations of Anishinaabe and Algonquin people who have and continue to protect and care for these lands, which grant food, water, and the means to connect with one another. We also value the contributions that Inuit, Métis, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community, province, and country. So as we gather here virtually for this webinar presentation, I invite you all to take a moment to reflect on the lands from which you are joining us. Now I will let my colleague Alejandra introduce herself and begin the presentation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alejandra Guitron, and I'm a program officer here at the CFI, the Canada Foundation for Innovation. And I'm happy to present you the Northern Fund and happy to answer your questions. So this is the agenda that we want to present you. So we'll start with eligibility, objectives and timeline, budget, review process, and application process. And then we'll allocate some time to answer your questions. Okay, the Northern Fund eligibility criteria. So in order to apply to the Northern Fund, Canadian universities, college, research hospitals, and non-profit research institutions and organizations must meet both criteria. So it's be headquartered in northern regions. These are Yukon, Northwest Territories, Inuvialuit Settlement Region, Nunavut, Nunavik and Nunatsiavut, and be recognized as eligible by the CFI. So there are already a list of institutions that are eligible to the CFI, but to submit proposals to the Northern Fund, there are only 3 Northern institutions. This is Yukon University, sorry, Aurora College, and Kajijiatit Health Research Center. But if you want to submit a request to become CFI eligible, so you can contact us at eligibility@innovation.ca for more information on how to apply for eligibility. You can also click on that link and then you access to the requirements. So a couple of notes: the CFI funds institutions. It does not fund individual researchers. And an institution that is affiliated, federated, or closely associated to another eligible institution, CFI eligible institution, will not be eligible to become CFI, to receive a CFI funding, would not be considered eligible unless it receives its operating budget from a provincial or territorial government or has its own independent board of directors. Now the objectives and timeline. The Northern Fund has 3 main objectives. One is to support research that is led by Northern institutions and organizations and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, augment the research capacity in the North and for the North, and generate social, cultural, health, environmental, or economic benefits to Northern Canada and Northern communities, including academic and non-academic highly qualified personnel. So as important dates, we launched the Northern Fund back in the beginning of this year. That is the call for proposals in January 2024. And there are no specific deadlines. So you can submit a proposal anytime between February 2024 and February 2028. And we'll aim to provide funding decisions within 6 months from the date the proposal is submitted. Also, all research infrastructure expenditures are eligible as of January 1st, 2022. Yeah, the budget. So the budget for the Northern Fund. Over 5 years, the CFI will invest $25 million for research infrastructure. So this is the capital and the operation and maintenance funding. Out of these 25 millions, 5 millions will be reserved for eligible non-for-profit organizations. This is for the first 3 years. After this period, if any funds of this 5 million are still uncommitted, they will become available to all applicants. This is to support the participation of non-for-profit organizations. You can submit a request between 250,000 and 2.5 million. The CFI will invest 50% of the total project cost, and the remainder funds must be provided either by the institution or other eligible partners. Eligible partners can be provincial, territorial governments. It could also be vendors. It could be cash or in-kind funds, so from vendors or any other organization and research organization. And also, additionally, you can request some funding for the operation and maintenance. This could be up to the 100% of the CFI contribution. I will explain that in the next slide. So here we have two examples. So one project that requests the maximum amount. So this is 5 million. And then the CFI will contribute 50% of the total infrastructure cost. So the 50% of 5 million is 2.5 million. And then the rest of the funds must be provided by either the institution or eligible partners. So it's the 2.5 million remainder. And as I said, additionally, you can also request up to 100% of the CFI contribution. So this could be up to 2.5 million. For this portion, no partner funding is required. And the second example is the minimum amount that you can request. So it's 500,000. And so the total project is 500,000, and the CFI request is 50%, so it's 250,000. And the matching partners can provide the 50 or more of the total infrastructure cost. And then you can request up to 100% of the CFI contribution, but in this case, they decide to provide, to request 60% of the CFI contribution because they were able to justify that amount, or they just considered that they only needed 150,000 for the operation and maintenance. And again, this portion does not need partner funding. And then, the proposal development support, sorry. So as institutions might be in different stage of the proposal development, the CFI provides proposal development support in order to develop proposals. So you can request up to 50,000 per year to a maximum of 100,000 over 5 years. So this support does not require matching partner funding, and only CFI eligible northern institutions can request. And some of the eligible cost of this proposal development support include travel and accommodation expenses for proposal development teams and partners, audio and video equipment rental. This could be useful for the expression of support that my colleague will explain later. Third-party facilitation of proposal development activities, third-party grant writing or editing support, community advisors for creating or strengthening community partnerships, and other expenses pre-approved by the CFI. And then I will hand it over to my colleague.
Thank you, Alejandra. Over the next few slides, I will go over the details of our Northern Fund review process and then our application process. So the Northern Fund review process starts with the formation of the Northern Fund Advisory Committee, which will advise the CFI about the funding program's evolution and implementation. Upon submission of a proposal to the Northern Fund, we will also create what is called a Proposal Review Committee, which will review the proposals based on the 5 review criteria that correspond to the Northern Fund's objectives. The Proposal Review Committee will be primarily made up of Northern Fund Advisory Committee members, ideally entirely made up of the Northern Fund Advisory Committee members, but in special cases where pertinent expertise is required on the committee, we may add an additional external reviewer to inform the proposal review committee so that they come up with the best funding recommendations. So the goal of the proposal review committee will be to formulate funding recommendations that will move on to the board of directors, which will make the final decision at their board meetings, which are on March, June, and November of every year. The Northern Fund Advisory Committee members are invited to serve a 3-year term and will include representation from Indigenous communities in Northern Canada with relevant knowledge and experience conducting Northern and Indigenous research. Specifically, the committee will collectively have experience participating in community and academic research, including experience using and managing infrastructure in the Arctic, as well as mobilizing knowledge and the results of their research. As mentioned previously, the Proposal Review Committee will review each proposal on its individual merit and discuss its strengths and weaknesses for each of the review criteria without providing consensus ratings like most of our other funds. The committee meeting will include a virtual meeting with representatives of the applicant team, including partner community organizations, to gain further knowledge and understanding about the proposed project and role of the community organizations in the design, development, and management of the proposed project. Following their deliberations, the Proposal Review Committee will make funding recommendations for the CFI Board of Directors. In exceptional cases where the Proposal Review Committee finds weaknesses that are not substantive, they may choose to ask the institution who have submitted this proposal for more details to inform their decision making and provide them with another opportunity to update the proposal so that it can meet the standard that they need for it to be funded, or for it to be recommended for funding, I should say. So these are the 5 criterion that the Proposal Review Committee will use to evaluate proposals. You'll notice that each criterion is evaluated against a criterion standard. The standard is a statement that represents a proposal that fully satisfies all aspects of a criterion. So I'll just go over this first example, then we'll go into more detail for each one of them. So for example, an ideal proposal submitted to the Northern Fund for the research in the North and for the North criteria would include research activities that are of high relevance to Northern communities, are feasible, and have been co-created, co-developed, and co-managed with First Nations, Métis, or Inuit communities as appropriate. So I'll go into more detail over each of the criteria now. So I just went over the criterion standard for the research in the North for the North, which is the first criteria. In order to assess this standard, applicants must describe the research activities that will make use of the infrastructure and explain how they will address the priorities of Northern communities. This includes a nuanced description of the research methodologies and feasibility of their approach, as well as a description of the involvement of First Nations, Métis, or Inuit communities in the creation, development, and management of the program. Now, for the team criterion standard, it requires that the team have the relevant knowledge and experience to conduct the research activities, and that First Nations, Métis, or Inuit team members play meaningful and leadership roles in the research activities. Applicants should describe the knowledge required for the proposed research activities with a description of each team member's expected contribution. The infrastructure criterion standard dictates that the research infrastructure is necessary and appropriate and will augment research capacity in the North. For this criterion standard, they will need to describe each of the requested items and explain why they are necessary. And for the case of construction or renovation projects, they will need to provide a description of the space, including the location, size, and nature, and why this is necessary. For the sustainability criterion, the standard is that the research infrastructure will be well managed and efficiently used. What that means is that the applicants will need to provide information to indicate how the infrastructure will be operated and maintained and accessed over its useful life. They will need to outline operation and maintenance costs and revenue sources over the useful life of the infrastructure. And in doing so, they will need to include a rationale for the amount of CFI funding requested for operating and maintaining the research infrastructure. As Alejandro pointed out earlier, as a part of this fund, you are able to request up to 100% of the CFI contribution, which can be as high as $2.5 million for the operation and maintenance of equipment, but this will need to be sufficiently justified in the sustainability section. So that's where you can explain why you would need such high operational needs to maintain the equipment. You also need to describe key operation and maintenance needs and their associated costs, and describe how the principles of ownership, control, access, and possession of research data will be handled, and how knowledge will be shared and accessed by research projects stakeholders, including northern communities. Now, for benefits to northern communities, the standard is that there are clear pathways to transfer research results and or mobilize knowledge to residents of northern communities, including First Nations, Métis, or Inuit communities, and potential partners. The results are likely to lead to social, cultural, health, environmental, or economic benefits to northern Canada, including the training of highly qualified personnel. So in order to address this criterion, you must sufficiently describe the anticipated benefits for northern communities, which include all the social, cultural, health, and environmental and economic benefits, as well as information on the academic and non-academic highly qualified personnel that will make use of this infrastructure, and what skills they will gain, and the potential career paths or further contributions to their communities that this will enable. And finally, explain the pathways to transfer research results and mobilize knowledge to northern communities and potential partners. I hope that was clear, but please feel free to ask any questions. The application process will be all done through CAMS, but what I want to reiterate before we get started is that you should definitely reach out to myself and Alejandra using the Northern Fund inbox before going through the application process, because it is a little bit unique, and we're happy to help you every step of the way. So all proposals for the Northern Fund will need to be prepared, shared, and submitted through the CFI awards management system called CAMS. You will need to create a CAMS account if you do not already have one, and complete all of the information in the project, finance, and research security modules. You can see what the project module looks like here. Within it, you'll see that you have a review criteria section, which is where you would address all of the review criteria, and a lot of other sections pertaining to the different aspects of the proposal, including the budget and the operation and maintenance budget. You'll also see that there's a section for expressions of support, which I'll go into more detail here. So all proposals submitted to the Northern Fund will need to provide expressions of support from northern communities to describe how these communities will engage in or benefit from the proposed research activities. These expressions of support can be provided as any combination of written text, image, audio, or video formats. As Alejandra noted earlier, this can be the proposal development support funding can be used to enable the creation of these expressions of support if needed. So definitely take advantage of that if you can. Now, all of the information that's been presented today can be found in the Northern Fund Call for Proposals and the Guide for Reviewers, which have been linked here. You can also use the CFI Awards Management Guide for Administrators to submit any, to guide you in your submission of any proposals. And you'll also note the Policy and Program Guide, which has been linked here, which has further details on what it means to be an eligible institution, eligible costs for infrastructure projects, and the details of the Infrastructure Operating Fund, and what qualifies as eligible costs for operation and maintenance of equipment. So I know that was a lot of equipment, but thank you for attending the session. Now, please let us know if you have any questions. If you would prefer to contact us later, I'll leave our email up so you can send us an email at any time.